Hello dear learners, I am here with my third lecture of my 12th module. And in my third lecture, as you can see, I will be discussing about the recent trends in folk culture, in folklore studies actually. In my earlier lecture, I have given you, like how the initiatives, the government initiative, how the preservation techniques, the conservation techniques should take place to maintain our culture, specifically folk culture. And here I will be telling you about the trends, about the new studies, about the new genres which has arose of the folklore studies. So, I will start my lecture with the different kinds, you can say, of folklore studies we have now, like the branches actually. The study of oral traditions, practices and material culture has historically been the foundation of folklore studies. But as we all know, that it has undergone tremendous change throughout time. Folklore studies have given rise to new subfields and branches as a result of globalization, urbanization and technological advancement and changing scholarly perspectives. These more recent fields demonstrate a deeper comprehension of the role of folklore in contemporary society encompassing digital, urban and diasporic settings. You can see I have given you the name of 6 kind of the new genres we have. So, here I will be talking about the various genres of folklore studies, and I have taken a few actually. The urban folkloristics, the internet folklore, the performance studies, the diaspora studies and the feminist studies. Okay? So, what is urban folkloristics or urban folklore? Urban folklore actually challenges the long held belief that folklore exclusively exists in remote or rural areas by examining traditional cultural manifestations and activities in urban and metropolitan environments. For example, I have given here the photo of the Dharavi slum, the largest slum it is said to be existing in India. It's in the heart of the city of Mumbai, right? And the stories we get from these places, they are also a part of our culture and they are a part of our urban folkloristics. As I said, that urban folkloristics challenges the notion we have that folk culture should be only rural, but no, we can have the urban perspective of folk culture too. Also, street art and graffiti, neighborhood customs, urban tales, urban migration, cultural blending, all are a part of the urban folklore. This field, acknowledges that despite the modernity, cities serve as rich environments for the development of folklore. Next, the internet folklore or digital folklore. This field examines how conventional modes of expression have moved to and changed inside online communities and forums, such as social media, the meme culture, and we have the online memes, we have the digital horror tales, we have the online narratives, the TikTok stories. Presently, we also have, Instagram influencers who are also a part of our folk culture, and they are actually challenging, as I said, the previous norms of folk culture. In the Instagram influencers, if you see, there are certain influencers who have actually uplifted the culture, specifically the folk culture of their place. They are bringing, the foods of their culture, the lifestyles of their culture, the festivals of their culture, and in a way making it a part of the digital repertoire, which is also a part of the folk culture, but on a different medium. Next, the feminist folklore. Through the prism of gender and power relations, feminist folklorist re-examines traditional folklore, frequently emphasizing the contributions of women to the creation, preservation and transformation. I have dealt with particularly women folklore in one of my lectures in Lore of One Zone, how women are a very prominent part of folk culture and folklore, and how they are the agencies of transmitting the practices, the customs from generation to generation. Next, we have the performance studies. Although not entirely novel, performance studies emerged as a prominent subfield in the latter half of the 20th century. It views folklore as performative, involving action as well as language. The ritual performances, storytelling events and folklore that is embodied in dance, music and theatre performer audience forms the dynamics. It also highlights the background, purpose and influence of folklore as something that is done as opposed to just spoken. We also have the diaspora and ethnic folklore. This branch explores how folklore functions amongst immigrant, refugee and diasporic communities. For example, the folklore of immigrant communities, hybrid folklore forms, cultural preservation in the diaspora, and it shows how folklore helps people maintain identity and cohesion while navigating new cultural landscapes. For example, as I have given you the term here, diaspora, right? So, who are the diaspora people? The people who are migrating from their own country to another country in search of better livelihood. And while they are going to the other country, they are still sticking to their own culture, own roots, and they are a part forming the ethnic and the diasporic culture, the folklore studies we have. Now, I am going to talk about some of the more trends. For example, we have the occupational folklore, we have the queer folklore studies, we have the applied folklore, the folklore and applied culture, environmental folklore and trauma studies. So, these are few of the more trends we have in folklore studies. What is the occupational folklore? Okay, this study expresses the culture of people within specific professions or trades. For example, jargons, jokes and rituals among doctors, truckers and firefighters, workplace customs and initiation rites, tools and traditions unique to an occupation, and also if you see if you kind of notice, okay, the trucks, the big trucks, they are a very important part of Indian transport system. You will see there are certain slogans, certain proverbs written on the back of the trucks. And that also forms a part of folklore studies, and people are actually doing research on those proverbs, on those shairis or on those jokes written on the back of trucks. They are also a part of research now, a part of our culture now. Then we have the queer folklore studies, which is relatively new, and it shows how LGBTQ plus communities use folklore to express identity, challenge norms and build community. For example, the drag performances as folk expression, coming out narratives, folklore in queer clubs and spaces, and reinterpretation of myths through queer lenses. Then we have the applied folklore, which is also called the public folklore, and this branch uses folkloristic methods to engage with real world issues, community development. Also, the community based projects, the museum and heritage work, folklore and education, academia, they all are making folklore accessible and impactful outside university settings. Next, we have the folklore and the popular culture. And what happens here? The intersections between folklore and mass media and pop culture is a part of this folklore. For example, the folkloric themes in films, TVs, video games, pop culture icons, folk heroes, fan culture, everything are a part of this study. We have the environmental folklore or eco-folklore, which talks about the relationship between traditional knowledge and environmental awareness or sustainability. For example, the folklores or narratives of animals, forests, rivers, sacred groves, nature rituals, environmental activism and everything. And it shows how indigenous and local traditions can contribute to contemporary environmental solutions. We also have the folklore and the trauma studies. And this one shows how communities use folklore to process, cope with or resist trauma, including war, displacement, pandemics or natural disasters. What we have here, the focus area, they are the survivor narratives, the memorial rituals and humor and satire, collective memory. For example, the people who have faced, partition, okay, be it the 1947 partition, okay, or the also the displaced by the war of 1971, they have the partition narratives which are a part of the trauma folklore. There are also institutions which work on the survivors' narratives. What happened to the people who were a victim of partition? Their narratives, their stories are a part of our partition studies along with the trauma they are carrying throughout the life. What trauma? The trauma of being displaced from their own motherland and coming to another land for survival. These are also a part of the folklore studies. Now, I'll be talking about some of the new dimensions of the folklore studies, and I'll be talking mainly about the three actually, anthropology, psychology and gender studies, and how they are kind of influencing the folklore studies. We have four types of anthropology: the physical anthropology, archaeology, linguistics and cultural anthropology, which is popularly known as ethnography, and they are all related to folklore studies. Physical anthropology and archaeology provide vital information regarding past developments and population movement. Linguistics is also related because of the style of verbal expression of a tale, and cultural anthropology or ethnography is concerned with the study of the customs, traditions and institutions of living peoples, and hence it is most closely associated with folklore. Also, we have Vladimir Propp, who is one of the most famous one, and he shows us that how epic poetry, ritual poetry, charms, riddles can be explained with ethnographic data. Folklore helps validate and transmit religious, social and political and economic practices. Ethnography, as I have discussed earlier, is a very important component of folklore studies, and it can be defined as a method by which the folk elements bring out the culture of the people, and it is a method I have discussed on observing, recording and participating. Also, psychology plays a very important role in the folklore studies. For example, Sir James Frazer, Carl Abraham, Otto Rank, Ernest Jones and others have used myth materials in their works. We have Carl Jung studying folklore, which are based upon psychology. We also have Malinowski, who points out the culture bound quality of classical Freudianism, and we have kind of Indian perspectives on folklore. Psychoanalysts, for example, in the classical tradition of Abraham, and they have view folklore as a behavior. Hence, psychological concepts like unconscious decisions, principles of human understanding, self-motivations, behavior patterns and consciousness have been themes of folklore. These principles have been applied to folklore by scholars like Arne and Walter Anderson. The significant contributions of Freud, Jung and Boas during the 19th and 20th century have contributed significantly to folklore research. Also, the folklore behavior makes a direct connection to the people's motivation, context, rewards and punishments. The expression of folklore is affected by the individual ego and individuals' attitudes towards themselves. We also have the gender biases which have pervaded the discipline of folklore studies. Remember, as I said, that women form a very important part of folklore, and their contribution to folklore are reinterpreted, and they are also being studied, and they are also being used for reconstruction of folk customs practices. So, the anthropological point of view, the psychological point of view and the gender point of view is very important in shaping the folk culture, the folklore studies, because it gives us new perspectives to look into the folk culture. They are, as I said, without them, we cannot view the folk elements in a different light, because we have a very standardized way of viewing folk culture, that okay, they are from the rural places, they have people, they are about the people, the tribes or the low class or everything. But no, the anthropological, the psychological and the gender point of view shows that folk culture is not only limited to people of specific class or strata, but it is applicable to the whole society, to all the class and the strata. Now, I am going to talk about the future of folklore research in India. Remember that the Indian subcontinent, is diverse, and we have the amalgamation, we have the combination of the Aryan and Dravidian culture, and offers an excellent galore of folk material. Despite the rich traditional and cultural wealth of our oral narratives, our folklores remain unexplored. However, the scenario is changing. Scholars have now released the immense possibility of a systematic study of the lore. The fog on the realities of Indian culture is slowly getting lifted and cleared. The studies are now being taken by adapting new approaches. With the structuralist approach for folklore studies in the mid-50s, folk and oral traditions gained prominence in cultural and anthropological studies. Alongside structuralism, we also have deconstruction. Okay? And what happens that sometimes we apply the theory. Remember, deconstruction is an application more than a theory. And we apply the deconstruction to deconstruct, or you can say to kind of reconstruct the certain myth or certain elements of a folk culture. For example, if we take a folk tale, we deconstruct them. How? We kind of look into the setting, to the, you can say, the context on which the folk tale was written, and who are kind of narrating the folk tales, the characters of the folk tales, and how that folk tale is applicable to the modern society. So, deconstruction not only breaks apart a certain element, but it also helps in reconstructing the certain element. Also, a major factor which has contributed to the India's diversity and cross-cultural milieu is the various invasions and conquest that it has been subjected to. For example, the various invasions, the rise and decline of the various kingdoms have given us the history of India. The cultural motive was interwoven with the culture of the invaders and colonizers. Also, much after independence, scholars and historians undertook to recreate history with the help of oral traditions and folklore. The complexity of Indian diversity and the cultural unity is seen in the language, food, dress, oral traditions, literature and other aspects of Indian life. Scholars, researchers and academicians took to an analytical study of folklore. Scientific investigation and theoretical approaches started gaining importance in the systematic study of folk tradition. The purpose of the study of folklore was not extrinsic, like it was for the nationalists and the missionaries. Rather, it became more of an inner quest for truth and reality. With the focus of independent India to preserve its cultural splendor, folklore became the mainstay and source of culture. Its studies gained prestige and power, recognition and respect. Consequently, the studies gained momentum and took on a scientific approach. Today, folklore has become as important as any other discipline. It has become, an area for interdisciplinary research, and there are universities in India who are giving, degrees. For example, MA in folklore studies, PhD in folklore studies, which is actually taking this folklore or the folklore studies a step ahead. Also, folklore has moved beyond the walls of education and has contributed to the database of government and other voluntary organizations. A lot of collection and analytical work on folklore is being undertaken at multiple levels. A lot more needs to be done for the Indian scholars to reach the levels of their Western counterparts. Research and scholarly works have laid bare the rich and diversified treasure trove of folk materials spread across the Indian subcontinent. Every state and region in India have their own share of myths and tales which exclusive to that state but echoing the unity and the oneness of the country. One might think that folk tales are no longer irrelevant, but the modern age being governed by rational thinking and skepticism being its hallmark, folklore with its myths and legends would seem a relic from the past ignored and forgotten. In spite of technology and material comforts, there is a growing discontent in the minds of the people. But it also serves as a vital link with the past, which will shed light on human history and experiences. For example, folklore can help explore the collective unconsciousness. The stories which are relevant for the archetypes gives us the consciousness and they tell us much about the way in which the human brain works. Folk tales help reconnect with the past. The moral truths that maintain their meanings are equally relevant today. The folk culture helps us reconnect with our origins, our identity, and rediscover a true sense of what it means to be a human. It also serves as a tool for the subaltern groups to raise their voices against discrimination. Also, the folklore study instills the spirit of nationalism. Folk tales makes it easier for children to differentiate characters, follow a plot line or recall a sequence of events. Folklore also helps the 21st century skills of critical and creative thinking, decision making and problem solving. The characters, they invariably encounter conflicts. With technological advancement, travel and tourism, they have enabled people to reach across to the masses. Also, mythological tales, stories can be used to point out the causes of social systems that promoted gender and caste-based inequalities. We also have, in these mechanical times, the folk tales, as I am saying, the myths, the narratives, which remind ourselves that we are more than robots doing routine jobs. Now, we come to the end of the third lecture of the 12th module. And here I have attempted to give you, an idea of how we can revive folklore, how it has become, an integral part of our life. And also, interestingly, we have the Amar Chitrakatha books, right, which have, which are actually, a repository of graphic narratives. We have the photos, right, the drawings actually, and the stories beside it of the epics of, like traditional tales, which makes it more interesting for younger generation to older generation reading the book. And that is where Amar Chitrakatha has actually survived, and more important than surviving, it has made the folk tales, the folk culture and everything, the stories, the proverbs, the myths accessible to the whole of India, to the whole of world actually. Amar Chitrakatha has their books, right? But they also have a wonderful virtual collection which helps people throughout the world to read the books on, Indian culture. And that is where, these initiatives are actually helping the culture to revive, which is very necessary for our identity. Thank you and see you in the next lecture.